Welcome to the Otherweb. Our guest today is Jaqua, an American who lived in Japan for several decades and is now seeking to rally others to his cause of fixing American politics and breaking through the partisan gridlock in Washington. To be frank, this conversation is a departure from our usual topics, and we usually try to stay away from politics. But something about Evan seemed interesting enough to make that departure. If politics are not your thing, feel free to skip this one. But if you find it interesting, this might just be the episode for you. Evan, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Alex. It's an honor to be here.
It's great to have you. So you started a solutions party. Can you explain what that is?
Well, basically, it starts from the premise that, Ronald Reagan said many years ago that government isn't the solution, government is the problem. And I think that there is some accuracy to that, but I think it's actually more specific than that. I think the vast majority of our problems come down to our politicians. It's not so much government itself, because government is really is formed and operated through our elected representatives. The biggest problem that we have, I believe, and it's not only us, but it's a worldwide problem, and it's existed throughout history, is that we have to recognize that the human brain gets addicted to things very easily. It can get addicted to drugs, it can get addicted to alcohol, it can get addicted to video games, social media, but probably the most addictive thing of all is power. And once people have power, they don't want to give it up. And this is exactly what is the problem with one of the main problems with our politics right now. Politicians get into office, and what is their first priority? It's staying in office. As John Boehner, the former Speaker of the House, he said people get a little power and they completely change. It's like people who get addicted to drugs. You might have known them before they were addicted to drugs, and after they get addicted to drugs, they're completely different people. I've known people who are alcoholics who, before they became alcoholics, were much different people than they were after they became alcoholics. And the same thing happens with power. This is why we have not only our politicians, but this is why Vladimir Putin, for example, viciously kills his political opponents. This is why the dictator of Syria will drop barrel bombs on innocent people. This is why the North Korean dictator will send entire families to gruesome prison camps. I know people, I've actually lived around the world, including in communist China, Japan, South America. I have former family members who were sent to Chinese prisons because of their, just not even because of their political beliefs, simply because they happened to be educated, and the government wanted to try to eliminate. I know this sounds crazy, but it happened in Cambodia too. People with education, they saw them as a potential threat to their power. So the cure, it seems to me, is like if a doctor had to prescribe to you a medication that was highly addictive, well, what would be the method to keep you from getting addicted? Well, they would give you a small portions spread out. And that's exactly what we need to do with our politics. We need to have our politicians who are elected concentrating 100% on the job, not what they're doing now, which is over 50% of their time working to get reelected and playing politics. Instead of coming up with solutions, their first priority is staying in power. And we see this all the time. We're seeing it right now with all this arguing that's going on over Ukraine aid and immigration. There's a proposed immigration bill, but they don't want to touch it for political reasons. The Republicans in the House don't want to touch. And by the way, I'm not picking on any one party. This is just an example that comes to mind right now. So the first thing that I'm proposing is that we get rid of re-election entirely. And that's the starting point. But the problems that face our country and the problems that, in fact, face pretty much everywhere are intertwined. And it requires a comprehensive approach. So I've tried to come up at on my blog, which I call Solutions Party, solutionsparty.org, a comprehensive set of proposals that address not only our politics, but other things that we need to address are problems with the lack of credibility of our news organizations, the lack of credibility of our judiciary, uh, making our economy one that creates prosperity for all. And so it's a comprehensive set of proposals, and that's this is a long elevator speech. This is an elevator speech from the bottom of the world's tallest building. But so anyway, it's hard to talk about these things in sound bites. You once you begin explaining, you feel like you have to give a little bit more of a complete answer, and that's why it's a little bit longer than an elevator speech.
I'm not a fan of sound bites myself, but it's probably best if we try to separate all the topics and peel
Sure.
the onion one layer at a time.
Perfect.
So obviously you touched upon journalists. That's
Right.
my market. I'm really curious about your thoughts on that. But let's start with the first problem you're outlining, which sounds like an agency problem. The agents do not have the same interests or incentives as the principals in our politics. Right? The principals, being the voters, want certain things from government, like perhaps a reasonable immigration policy that looks more like Canada, Australia, other countries that have actually passed a bill. But what people in Congress care about is maintaining their 97% incumbency rate.
Exactly.
Just as they have a less than 10% approval rate. So the interests are obviously decoupled. The question is, how can you address it if any reform requires the politicians themselves to vote for it?
Well, the thing is if we get people buying into these ideas and who present themselves as candidates for office with the idea that they're only going to serve one term, if there are people who agree with these ideas that we've got to change our politics, and the first step is getting politicians in there who agree with this notion that we've got to get rid of the notion of reelection. That's the first step. It's just getting people to buy into this and then presenting themselves as candidates for office. The present politicians, the problem with, you can't expect the politicians who are in office now to make change. That is like expecting a hopeless alcoholic from giving up booze. They're just not going to do it. And so the first step has to be, we have to elect people who agree with this idea that we have to put in place a system that makes it virtually impossible for our politicians to get addicted to power.
But again, sort of trying to understand, I'm an engineer, so I'm going to try to understand the structure here, right? You're saying we recruit people into politics who are not addicted to power yet. And then we give them power, which is just like giving somebody a bottle of scotch, right? And then you're saying when they finish this bottle of scotch, we will ask them not to run for re-election, or we will ask them to vote for changing the laws such that nobody will run for re-election, which is like just like saying, now you have free scotch, but you're supposed to give it up. It's problematic, right? You yourself said power changes people. And so once that person is in office, even if they ran on a platform that said no re-elections, why would they cancel re-elections? Now they can get re-elected at a 97% incumbency rate.
Well, I think that if somebody presents themselves as a candidate with this notion that they're going to work to eliminate the notion of re-election, I think that if they then turned around and said, well, actually, I want to be reelected, I think that would be looked upon very unfavorably. This whole notion that, I'm against reelection, except when it comes to me. I think if the U.S. population, if the U.S. electorate bought into this notion that the first thing we have to do is to make it impossible for our politicians to get addicted, and so we're going to vote for people who agree to serve only one term and codify these changes, and we vote for them, we get them in office, and then halfway into their term they decide, actually, I want to be reelected. I don't think that would go over very well. I think that if the American people bought into the idea that we have to get rid of a system that allows people who are addicted to power to stay in office, and it's exactly as you said. Right now, we have an incumbent has an overwhelming probability of getting reelected, and it's something that we have to change, I believe.
Okay. So let me then try to understand the details of what that proposal would entail. First of all, I wonder how you would address the fact that there are different lengths of terms, like Congress
Right.
people serve for 2 years, senators for 6 years,
Right.
presidents for 4 years, etc. Besides that, it seems like people transition between these roles. We have a president now that used to be in the House, then in the Senate, then the vice
Right.
presidency,
Right.
then the presidency. So even saying no re-elections would not preclude him from having a 20 plus year career in Washington, D.C.
You're
So
right.
what specifics would you propose?
You're exactly right. Well, for one thing, I think the House of Representatives, I think the term should be, in this case, should be extended to 3 years if we're going to have just one term. But the other thing that I propose is that once your term ends, you cannot run for office immediately. You have to have a 2-year waiting period before you can run for another office. And the reason why I think that's important is because you don't want, if they might think, okay, well, I can't run for this same office, but I'm going to use my time in office to set the stage for my next election, which is immediately after my term ends. And so they get into this constant campaign mode. And we don't want that. So we want to have a period where after their term ends, they cannot run for another office for 2 years, but it has to be a different office. So yeah, you can have politicians who go from being a U.S. representative, after their term ends, 2 years later, they run for Senate, they take one term, then they run. That's no problem at all. That's no problem at all. You just don't want them using their present office, elected office, as a platform for their next election. So to
Yeah,
answer,
that's certainly one thing that was a little odd to me when I just moved to the US.
uh-huh.
It's seeing that the primary candidates for the presidency are typically governors.
Mm-hmm.
And typically, the governor starts campaigning for the presidency as soon as they get reelected as a governor.
Exactly.
So their second term is essentially empty because the cycles are often misaligned by 2 years, and the campaign takes a little over a year. And so they have less than a year governing before they start running for president.
Exactly. And we don't want the governors making policy at the state level with an interest, mainly with the idea of boosting their presidential campaign. We want them to concentrate on the work that needs to be done at the state level and not be, tweaking their policies with the idea of boosting their chances in the presidential election. One of the analogies I like to say is, suppose you had a contract employee, you contracted him for 4 years, but this employee is spending half the time on the job every day just lobbying to get a contract extension. I don't think any of us would be very pleased with that. And that's exactly what we have now. Our politicians spend at least half of their day raising money and engaging in other political activities solely for the purpose of advancing their partisan interests or enhancing their careers or staying in office. And I think that that's a waste of time. And we want them concentrating on finding solutions to problems and not on advancing and keeping their political power.
It sounds like a very interesting idea. I'm just trying to figure out again how you can practically make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like just this example alone,
Mm-hmm.
saying that governors cannot run for the presidency while they are governors
Or any other
either
office.
requires you to change the law in 50 states or it requires you to pass a constitutional amendment that actually changes the qualifications for the presidency.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those require a very large number of people to agree, and it doesn't
You're
seem
exactly
like
right. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. The great thing about democracy is we, the people, have the power to make those changes. And yeah, it's a tall order to accomplish. But you see, one of the things that we need to address in this country is to focus our elections on ideas and not on emotions. See, right now, um, elections are much more about emotion manipulation and misinformation than they are about ideas. For example, I'm not picking on Donald Trump here, but very few people go to a Donald Trump rally to hear ideas. They go to a Donald Trump rally to get riled up and to get a lot of things about how bad the other people are and how great we are. But it's not about ideas. And this is how most of our elections are. If you look at the advertisement for political campaigns, there are a lot of ridiculous attack ads, and there are a lot of ridiculous razzle dazzle marketing messages, but very little focus on the ideas. We want our elections to be based on ideas, and if you get the emotions out of the elections and you focus on the ideas, then progress can be made. Even very ambitious progress can be made. But right now, there's a lot of interest by entities that are against democracy to have our elections be tribal, to have our elections be based on tribal emotions and not on ideas. Where one of the big reasons for this is that once you break it up into tribes, people vote automatically for their tribe regardless of the ideas. It's not even about ideas anymore. Which tribe do you belong? I know people, sadly, who will say, I will never vote Democrat. And I know people, sadly, who will say, I will never vote Republican. But we don't want that. We want principled candidates expressing their ideas clearly and letting the people decide with the emotions and the misinformation out of the picture. And if you have elections like that, yes, real progress can be made. Constitutional amendments can be implemented, and other laws can be implemented. Now, somebody who gets elected, to address your point about the governor, yeah, somebody who, let's say, is going to be governor for 4 years, they can't run for any other office according to this proposal for office. They still might put some of their time or some of their energy into an anticipated presidential run in the future. But it's going to be a lot less concrete, a lot less in their face. It's going to be more, okay, this is for somewhere down the future. So I think it's going to be a lot less this sort of, as it is now, a lot of emotion manipulation, policies that involve a lot of emotion manipulation, like Ron DeSantis with his war on woke. I think that if he weren't allowed to run for president while he's governor, I think there would be a lot less incentive for him to be carrying on this war on woke.
So again, I don't want us to take a partisan stance here because I would
I know.
suggest that many different politicians do those things.
Oh, I
I do
agree.
want to run one thing by you. You suggested a dichotomy between ideas and emotions. And it sounds to me like in the business world, I don't use either one typically when I hire people. I use competence.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't even ask what are you going to do in this hypothetical situation that might not ever happen in your term, right? I typically just try to figure that this person is competent, and when they are faced with a problem, they will address it with the due diligence it requires. So I find it almost odd that we ask people about their ideas on topics that they haven't had to address until now. Do we really need to do that, or do we just need to make sure this is an actual competent, relatively honest, as much as politicians can be, person?
Yeah. First of all, I want to just I don't mean it all to be partisan, and these are just examples that are coming to mind because we had the Republican primary, for example, and so that's. I totally agree. This is not meant to be partisan. I'm not picking on Republicans or Democrats here. I've just picked a few examples that were kind of low-hanging fruit. Okay. Number two, when we are listening to candidates and their ideas, of course, we want people who we think that are going to be competent and able to implement those ideas. I don't think that that you're just going to have somebody who just has ideas, but you don't have confidence that they have the ability to promote those ideas and to advance those ideas. But I do think that we want in our elected officials, we want a diversity of different types of people. Right now, we have basically a rich lawyers club for Congress. I think we want to have, it's like William Buckley said, the famous conservative commentator said that he would rather see elected officials chosen at random from the Boston phone book than a bunch of political elites. And I think that there's something to that. We want to have our elected officials be a cross section of different types of experiences and of careers. But that does not mean that they are going to be incompetent or that their ability to carry out certain ideas is going to be less. I think that this is something when you hear somebody propose ideas, you obviously want to vote for somebody who not only has good ideas, but you have confidence that they can carry out those ideas.
I think what I'm trying to get at is that I am surprised we hear almost no I don't knows in politics.
Mm-hmm.
When a politician is asked what is his opinion on a particular issue, or when a politician is asked what would you do if this kind of thing happened, I would expect an actually competent person most of the time to say, I don't know. I haven't looked into the details yet.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the fact that it seems like we expect politicians to have an opinion on everything is in itself kind of polarizing because they haven't had a chance to form a real opinion. What they're going to do is pick whatever opinion their tribe is supposed to have and just state it in the most fluid terms possible. No?
Well, yeah, but this is part of the problem, I think, with our politics now. I mean, for example, how many times is a politician now, a career politician, asked a question, and they give a different answer. They don't even answer the question directly, or they answer it in a very ambiguous way that doesn't really clarify anything. See, our politicians, when you ask, when you think about experienced politicians, well, what are they experienced at? They're experienced at playing politics, and that means giving answers that don't actually address the question, or giving very ambiguous answers. And part of the problem is that, as you say, they don't say "I don't know" now, because that gives their political opponents red meat for them to go and attack them. The politicians now are very discouraged from giving honest, direct answers. They have every incentive to give ambiguous answers that can be interpreted in multiple ways, and we don't want that. We want our politicians, our elected officials, to give straight, clear answers. And if that involves an "I don't know," well, that would be great. They just come out and say, "I don't know, but I will look into it and I'll get back to you tomorrow." But right now, the incentives are totally against that. If a politician says something like that, that's going to be used against them.
The only example I can think of is what is Aleppo. That was probably the closest thing to an I don't know we've had in presidential politics, and it was basically the death of Gary Johnson's candidacy, right?
Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm.
All right, so shifting gears a little bit, we understand politics is hard to fix. What about journalism? Seems like that should be somewhat easier, right?
Well,
What issues do you see there?
okay, I see this. Okay, first of all, if you believe, as I do, that the pen is mightier than the sword, then this country needs to put as much moral equivalence into having robust journalism as we need as a robust defense. Our defense, our armed forces protect us against threats from outside, but our journalism protects us from both internal and external threats. We need to have robust journalism in this country. Now, part of the problem is that, in the old days, it was not easy to set up a news organization, be it a newspaper, be it a television station, or be it a radio station. You had to have a lot of capital to do that. Even a small newspaper, you had to have a way to print the paper. You had to have journalists. You had to have ways to distribute the papers. It was a complex endeavor. But with the age of the internet, anybody with a laptop and a website can start a news site. And so what has happened is that the conventional business model of news has broken down. And that's why so many newspapers, tragically, are going out of business. Very few, only the largest ones are still able to make a business of it. And what a lot of organizations have done, news organizations, they've shifted from providing information in a neutral and factual based manner, and they've moved on to what you call emotion manipulation. This is not only Fox News, but it's NBC. They are more in the business of emotion manipulation than they are in actually providing news and facts. So one of the things we have to do, I think, is just recognize that the conventional model of journalism just does not work anymore. And I think we have to address this in two ways. We have to, just as we have certified doctors, certified lawyers, certified pilots, certified database engineers, we need to have a way to certify our journalists. number one. Number two, journalists should also be given a grade based on the quality of their reporting, the neutrality of their reporting, their objectivity of their reporting, the relativeness of their reporting, so that a certification would be like a college degree, for example, the analogous of a college degree, and the grades or the rating would be equivalent to the grades. So this is very important because with increasing fake news and deep fakes and things like that, for example, if a politician, there's a video of a politician with a prostitute going around, if we see that on a certified news site, we can have confidence that it's a real video. But if it's on just some random websites that are not certified as news sources, we can conclude that it's probably a fake. That's number one, certifying and rating our journalists and news organizations. Number two is we have to have a pot of money into which the government can contribute, into which corporations can contribute, into which individuals can contribute, that is used to pay journalists' salary. We want, for example, journalists in small towns who can make a living as a journalist. Small town journalism has always been critical to discovering, for example, corruption at the local level. But right now, there's just not the conventional business model for news does not work in these local markets, which is why we have a loss of journalism at the local level. And the way to fix that is you make journalism a viable career again, funding it through this we'll call it the journalism fund. And that the higher the rating, the more that they get, the more monthly stipend they get. So if it's a journalist who is writing very relevant articles, high quality, neutrality, excellent rating, they get paid more. And of course, frequency of articles would be a factor too. If they're writing articles that are not as relevant or not as neutral or not as frequent, they get less money. And if they lose their certification because they've done a poor job, they don't get any money at all. So I think those are the two things we need to do to address our journalism. We need to certify our journalists, rate our journalists, and have a fund to support our journalists.
And whom would you trust to make all these decisions on certification, on grading, on fund allocations?
Well, there's already a Society of Professional Journalists organization. That could be one. Or we could start an organization could be started with the sole purpose of certifying journalists based on certain criteria. And so, yes, we would have to have a certifying organization that would be supported too by this journalism fund. But you could have two. You could have this organization, but you can also have AI-based ratings of journalists. So you have a double way of evaluating journalists.
So for what it's worth, AI-based ratings is what my company does, and AI-based evaluation of the article itself, right? But I am curious with the equivalent of essentially the bar organization for journalists, right? The common pushback that you would likely get is that because this organization would have so much power, and because journalists have so much power to shape public opinion, that power itself would corrupt, just like political power would corrupt, right? And the organization would be much more likely to pursue an agenda than to actually try to rate people on being impartial. There is a very strong incentive for them to just shift the center and say the impartial center is right here, where we like it to be, and not where the actual center is based on some epistemological process.
Yeah.
So how would you safeguard against that other than, again, my approach is AI and it has to be open source so you can read what I did.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? But what other approach could there be?
Well, I think, number one, having not just one AI program, but having multiple AI programs, and then you get an average grading and you compare that to the certifying organization's rating. And I think that would be one way to check that. But the other thing is you could have multiple certifying organizations as long as they, some certifying organizations might have less credibility than others, that could be evaluated too. But yes, I totally agree. You have to have a check on the organization. And the two ways to do that, or at least proposed two ways to do that, is you have an automated approach, multiple AI programs, and you come up with an average. Or number two, even have multiple certifying organizations.
So we've described your ideas on how to improve politics, how to improve journalism. I guess my last question is, where are you with both these pursuits? Is there already a party with members? Can people join and support the cause in some way?
Well, to be honest, I'm just launching this right now. And this is the first step, starting with podcasts and exchanging opinions with other people. But yeah, this is the slowly trying to get the train to leave the station. So I'm looking for people who would be interested in joining me on this effort. And this is the first step. We're just getting started here. But I created the blog, or the website. First, the idea is just to get the ideas on paper, quote unquote. And now the second step is to try to get others to join in.
So if others wanted to join in, where should they go?
They go to my website, and there's a link to contact me, info@solutionparties.org. And I'd love to have people join in on this. And even right now, I'm not going to run for office, but I would love to have people running for office with these ideas. I think they would resonate. I think people are sick and tired of politics in our country. I think they're sick and tired of the lack of progress and the political games. And, so much, as I say, of our problems now come down to our politics. And I think that this would be I think the ideas proposed here would be an effective way to move forward. And I think a lot of people would agree with that.
All right. I really appreciate your time. And I will include the link in the description below the episode when it is posted, so people can go to your website and check it out.
Well, thank you so much, Alex. It's been a true pleasure. I really actually want to know more about your company too. I'm very interested in that, and maybe I'll even include that in one of my blogs as an example.
Thank you so much, Evan.
Well, thank you, and I look forward. I hope we can do this again sometime soon.
This has been another episode of The Otherweb. Join us next time for more discussion on media, news, and yes, sometimes even politics, but usually not.